share data with your mobile workforce using SQL Server and TracerPlus Connect version 8.0. I am your presenter today, Joe Kraebel. I am a mobile solutions architect here at PTS. And what I'm going to go through today is creating a SQL database, creating a matching TracerPlus Desktop project, and then showing you how we marry those two up to sync data back and forth to a SQL Server database using our TracerPlus Connect product. I'm going to show probably mainly live mode today, which is a new feature in TracerPlus Connect 8 that allows the real-time transfer of data back and forth. So we're very close to release at this point. We're just finalizing some user guides. So we're very excited to get this out to you. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do today is create an application for checking in and checking out employees. Basically, if you wanted to track employees or folks that are coming in and out of conferences or any type of training, I'm just going to create an app that can quickly do that for you. So as you're looking at here, this is our latest version of TracerPlus Desktop with the new UI. As you can see, it's much more intuitive than the previous version. We streamlined things a bit, made things more intuitive to the user, and basically ordered things in importance of use. So I'm going to go ahead and create this project. We'll call it employee scans. You'll see we have different OS platforms now, not only Windows Mobile, but we now function on Android as well. For this purpose, I'm going to use Windows Mobile. And then we have various other settings here of Admin, Launcher, Connect. I'm not going to get into those since this is mainly focused on TracerPlus Connect. So the next thing I'm going to do is create a check-in app. We'll call this check-in. And we'll want to scan the employee ID. Maybe we want to look up their name, their department, and then maybe even an image of the actual employee to make sure that they're the ones checking in, that they didn't pay anyone to sit in the meeting for them. We'll also set a date, time, and then a transaction type. Now I'm going to go ahead and create basically the same session. I can actually copy that instead of creating it. And I'll just rename that to checkout. And we'll have the same information there. And lastly, I'll create an employee list. So that'll contain the employee ID, name, department, and image. Now I'm going to configure some settings here. So once we scan the employee ID, we're going to want to look up the name. So I'm going to set this to a type of lookup. We're just going to enable lookups actually. We're going to look in the employee list based on the employee ID to pull in the name. We're going to do the same for the department. And then also the same for the image. Now we're going to set a date time that the employee checks in. So we'll set this to a data type of date time. And then we can customize what that date time format looks like. Lastly, I'm just going to have a default type here of check-in because I'm actually going to post these transactions to the same table. So it'll differentiate what transaction is a check-in versus a check-out. So we'll set that to static, read-only, and we're not going to clear that. We'll also make the date time read-only, and we can also make these lookups read-only so that they're not modified. All right, so now I'm going to jump over to our form designer. I'm just going to create a default form. The date, time, and type we actually don't need, so I can remove those. The image field, we actually want to pull up the image of the person, so I'm actually just going to add an image control to the form. I'm just going to remove the field. And what I'm going to do for that is just set a source field for that image control so that when the image is looked up, it looks up that file name and it displays the image. I'm going to do the same thing for checkout. Look in our employee list for the name. Do the same for department. And finally, image. Set our date time. Set that to read only, and then our type for this one would be checkout. We'll also set these to read only. Create our form, remove our 2 fields, actually 3 fields, since we're not using the image field, but an image control. Set our source field of image. And our employee list, I'm just going to set this to image because I'm going to actually take the photos on the device itself just so we have some data to work with. Now create a default form. So now we have our 3 sessions here, check-in, check-out, employee list. So now what we want to do is create that same structure in our SQL database. So I'm using SQL Server 2008. So I'm just going to go ahead here and right-click database and create a new database. It's going to call it webinar underscore, or actually call it SQL underscore webinar, and then hit OK. So here's our new database. Now I'm going to create a couple tables. So our first new table will be our employee list. First we'll set a key field, just an ID that's an integer field. Then we have our employee ID, our name, department, and image. Now I'll set my field types. We can just make these nvarchars or varchars. And for the image fields in SQL Server, the correct data type would be image. I'm going to set my ID as the primary key, and I'm also going to make that an identity so that it auto-increments for us. So we'll just set that as identity yes. I'm going to go ahead and save that. We'll call this one employee list. Next, I'm going to go ahead and create another table for our scanning transactions. Once again, we'll add an ID field. We'll have our employee ID, our name, department. We don't need the image for this. Then we'll just need the date and then type, which is our transaction type of check-in or check-out. Now I'll just configure my data types. Once again, these can all be nvarchars or varchars. Set our primary key. And once again, set that as an identity field. And we'll go ahead and save this. We'll call this employee scans. Okay, so now that we have our sessions created and our database tables created, now the question is, how do we make these two talk to each other? So that's where our TracerPlus Connect software comes in. So if I go ahead and open that up for you. Make sure I'm on the right version here. Yep. Okay, so this is going to allow you to marry a source to a destination. So a source being the SQL Server database and our destination being TracerPlus, or vice versa if we're taking data from the device and syncing it back to SQL Server. So in order for TracerPlus Connect to see that SQL Server database, we need to create a Windows data source for it. So I'm going to go ahead, since I'm on a 64-bit version of Windows, I'm going to access the ODBC administrator tool via the C Windows, and it's under the syswow64 folder. And then I'm looking for the ODBC AD32.exe. So this is our 32-bit ODBC administrator. And what I'm going to do is add a new system DSN. So I'm going to click Add, come down to our SQL Server driver, and click Finish. So we'll name this SQL_webinar. I'll go ahead and select the SQL Server that we want to point to. In this case, it's just going to be my local PC. So it should just have a local option in this drop-down. I'm going to go ahead and hit Next. I'm going to use Windows authentication, but you could use SQL Server authentication as well. Once I hit Next, I can choose what database this data source should be pointing to. So that should be our SQL_webinar database we just created. I'm going to click Next and Finish. And lastly, I'll go ahead and test the data source to make sure it connects, and it does, completed successfully. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK to all this. So now in TracerPlus Connect, I'm going to create a new project here. And I'm going to add a new profile. So as I was mentioning earlier, I'm actually going to show you our live mode, which is new to Connect in version 8. So now when you create a profile, you have the option of creating a sync profile or a live profile. So a sync profile will be the same as what you used to. If those of you who are currently using TracerPlus Connect, that still allows you to do the same thing you did before. That'll show you the source and the destination, and you'll be able to select both of those. For a live profile, since this only works with TracerPlus, we only give you the option to configure the data source that TracerPlus should be pointing to. So I'm going to go ahead and first map my desktop project, which I believe we called employee scans. So if we come back to Connect, I'm going to go ahead and point Connect to that desktop project. Let me just save it. Select our TPP, and then create profile. So you'll see that it'll automatically add the 3 sessions that are available to you for use in live mode. So we have our check-in, our check-out, and employee list. So first we're going to configure our check-in session. So our live data source is going to be ODBC since we're using SQL Server. Then we can select the ODBC data source that we just created. So that's our SQL_webinar. Once we do that, you'll see the available tables within that particular database. Now keep in mind, if this database also had views or stored procedures, you would also see those appear in this table list. So I'm going to connect this to our employee scans. I'm going to go ahead and remove our ID field from the mapping since we don't need that. And since we're not using image, I can actually remove that from this side of the mapping. So now you can see that all of our mappings lined up. Our data source fields from our SQL Server, we have employee ID matching up with the employee ID for the TracerPlus field. So you'll see how the mappings kind of tie up, and that's how it knows to put specific data in specific fields. Lastly, I'm going to add a key field here of our ID. Move on to our checkout. Do the same thing, ODBC, our SQL_webinar DSN. Once again, employee scans, add our ID as the key, and just align our mappings up here. All right, date, and then this should be type and type. All right. Lastly, let's configure our employee list. So this one is going to go to our employee list table. So we'll go ahead and fix these mappings. And our key fields, since employee ID should be unique to this table, we can actually set that as the key field. I'm just going to save my configuration. Call this SQL_webinar. So now if we jump over to our data viewer, we can actually view snippets of the actual SQL database. So instead of having to log into SQL Server to actually view the data, you could actually just view it in this data viewer screen here. So we have access to our 3 sessions here, check in, check out, and employee list. So the final thing we want to configure is how TracerPlus is going to now talk to TracerPlus Connect. So in Desktop, we have, under the project settings, we have a Connect option. So the first thing we want to do is add a host. So this will be the PC that your TracerPlus Connect is running on. So in my case, I'm just going to enter my IP address. You could also enter the host name of the PC or the PC name. This is useful in case that particular PC is on a network with a DHCP address. So this is going to allow TracerPlus now to seek out TracerPlus Connect on this IP address and port. Another thing that's new to version 8 is the live sessions. This is what enables the live mode in TracerPlus Connect. So what we want to do is add all sessions that we want to use in the live mode. So I'm going to go ahead and add our 3 sessions, choose them from our drop-down, select the host ID that we want to use, which is our right here. You'll see ID of 1. If in the event that you had Connect on multiple PCs, you may have multiple hosts here, and then you can tell the profile or live session which host it should talk to. You'll also see a profile ID setting. So if we jump back to Connect and our configure screen, you'll see that it's profile ID 1. If this particular live profile were added to an existing profile, it may end up being profile 2 or something greater. So that gives you the option to actually set what profile this live session should talk to. So I'll just configure the remainder. I'm going to go ahead and push this out to our device. Okay, now I'll pull up our device here using my mobiler. This allows us to remotely control the device and show you guys what we're doing here. So I'm going to go back to Connect. And if we look at our synchronized screen, this will show us any type of activity that's going on. So first, we want to actually add some employees to our list. I'm going to go into Employee Lists. Enter an employee ID. Let's say Employee 1, Jackie Moon. Say he's in HR. And we'll take a picture of him. So I have some pictures here for for demonstration. Just one moment here. The camera's a little slow on this device sometimes. All right, here we go. So here we'll put a picture in front here. Go ahead and take a picture of Jackie Moon there. And we'll go ahead and submit that to the database. So now you'll notice that this is going to post live to that database. So I just submitted the record. If we jump over to the data viewer, actually I did make a settings error. This employee ID should have been ID. Let me go ahead and do that again. So employee ID 1. Let's go ahead and take that picture again. Hopefully it opens a little quicker for us this time. And I'll go ahead and submit that again. Okay, there we go. That's better. So you'll kind of see in the data viewer, you can actually see the image that we took. If I were to expand this, it would actually show it. So the image actually embeds directly to the database. So that's why it's kind of beneficial to use a SQL type database for image data. As you can, since that embeds, you can just access that in any type of reporting that you do. So I'm going to go ahead and do another employee here. So we're going to do another flavor of Will Farrell here and Ron Burgundy. Say he's in accounting. Take a picture. With my finger in there. Go ahead and submit that. So now if we refresh, there's our second employee with our image. So now we've built our image table here, our employee table. Now we'll start doing some check-ins and check-outs. I'm going to go ahead and say we scan employee 1. So that should look up the name, their department. You'll see that it looks up their image and displays it in the control. Then we can submit. And then we'll see a transaction appear in our employee scans table. We'll scan Ron Burgundy. We'll go ahead and submit that. Refresh that. There's our 2 check-ins. Let's say we jumped over to checkout now. Do the same thing. We'll scan. Once again, that's going to do the same thing. Look everything up. We submit. We'll now have a checkout transaction. And do the same for the second employee. Submit. And there you have it. So that kind of shows you how quickly you can use TracerPlus Connect to marry your TracerPlus data to your SQL Server database. And I also showed you a nice preview of our live mode. You'll kind of see how quickly that works, even with images, how everything posted directly to the database itself. I can also show some data syncing here. If you didn't want to use live mode, we could actually go in a sync type environment. So I can create a sync profile. Once again, select our project, employee scans. So in this particular case, we would now add different processes to our profile. So let's say this one was sync to device. So we want to sync our employee list to the device. So we want to go from ODBC to TracerPlus. So once again, we'll take our SQL webinar. Our destination is TracerPlus, employee list. Fix our mappings. Actually, well, let's do an overwrite for this case. We can name the process, think employee scans, or employee list, I should say. So now, we wouldn't want to sync the employee scans at the same time as the employee ID, so now we want to add a third profile. It's strictly for syncing the employee scans from the device back to the database. Once again, we'll choose Sync Profile, Projects, Employee Scans, create our profile. We'll call this one Sync From Device. Add our first process. This will be Sync Check-In. Our source in this case will be TracerPlus. Our destination will be ODBC, our SQL database. Webinar, employee scans. We're going to go to we're syncing from the check-in session. Let's just marry up our fields here. We don't need the image. So we'll add our type. Go to our options here. We want to append the data to this table. And then we're going to want to remove it from the device since it's just transaction data. We'll create a second process for the checkout session. So we'll call this Sync Checkout. And it'll basically be the same thing except we're syncing from the checkout session. Employee scans. Of our image. Once again, append and delete after transfer. So this will only remove data after a successful sync. And it also doesn't work in trial mode for those of you who want to give the software a try. Okay, so let's save this. So now there's a few ways to get this data to and from your device. You can actually do the sync from within Connect itself using the sync buttons here, sync all, sync selected. This does require the device to be cradled to the PC, and also that you have Microsoft ActiveSync or Windows Mobile Device Center installed. Users of our older ODB Sync product would probably be most familiar with this, but most folks actually do the sync from the device itself. So we can actually sync wirelessly. So we still have our host here. So next thing we want to do is add some sync buttons to our form. So I'll add a sync button to our employee list. Or actually what I'll do is I'll add a fourth session called sync that'll be for our syncing. So I'll start with a blank canvas. We'll add a button here. And we'll call this one Sync Employee List. And we'll set a button action of Do Sync. And once we set that to Do Sync, we have a few settings we have to define. So we have a Sync Host ID and a Sync Profile ID. So this determines what Connect host we should be syncing to or from, and then what profile we should be using. Since we only had one host, it's host ID 1. The profile ID is going to be the one that's syncing to the device. So if we come back to Connect, that's our sync to device profile, and you see that that's ID 2. So we'll set that sync profile ID to 2. So now it knows once we press this button, it's going to sync all the processes that are in profile 2. I'm just going to copy this button. This will be our sync employee scans. Once again, we have our Do Sync button action. In this case, we're going to go Sync Profile ID, so that'll sync our processes that are in this third profile. So now I'll go ahead and push this over to my device by deploying it. And one other thing I need to do actually is turn off the live sessions if we want to use this in a syncing type environment. Otherwise, the sessions will try to connect in live mode. So that's as simple as just unchecking the enabled. Keep in mind you can actually do a combination of live and batch. We actually have a few users doing that where they're syncing a large employee list over to the device locally, basically so the lookups are performed faster, and then they're actually doing their transaction sessions live. So anytime they do a scan in or out, it posts to the database, but the actual lookup of the employee information is fast since that's local to the device. And I think they have over 100,000 records, so that works out well for them. All right, so let me deploy this again. All right. So now if we just jump over to our employee list, actually looks like we have some previous data there from another session I was working on, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that. Let's check everything else here, see if we have data. I'll just clear some of this stuff out. And if you have any questions at any point, I forgot to mention earlier in the webinar, if you can just enter them over to the question panel, and we'll address those at the end of the webinar. Okay, so now if we come over to our sync, we'll do our sync employee list. First, let's take a look. If we look at our synchronized page, we should see some activity when we go ahead and press this button. Now if we come back over, let's look at our employee list. And there's our two employees. Now if I come over and do a few scans, basically works the same way as it was in live mode, just that everything is now stored locally to the device. But obviously, due to wireless aspects, you will see slower speeds than if you were actually submitting locally to the device. Now that I submitted some transaction, let's jump back over to sync, and we'll sync some employee scans. But I'll sync those two processes. We do a refresh, we should see 4 more transactions than we do. So you can see how easy it is to set up TracerPlus Connect to talk to SQL Server, whether it be via a syncing process or even in a live real-time mode.